Gunfire cracked through the market square. Sand burst into the air, and men scattered like startled crows. Someone shouted orders, others screamed. In the middle of that chaos, she stood, shackled, silent. They were selling her while bullets still flew. The auctioneer's voice cut through the noise. $3. $3 for the captive. He waved his hand like he was selling grain, not a living soul. I ducked behind a broken wagon, rifle in hand, trying to make sense of the madness. Smoke curled through the air, and through it, I saw her face calm, unflinching, proud. She was covered in dust and blood, but her eyes, they were sharper than the blade at my hip. A soldier grabbed her by the arm, yanking her toward the platform. She didn't resist. She just looked at him and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'd rather die." That stopped everything. Even the gunfire seemed to hold its breath. The crowd hesitated, afraid, maybe ashamed. I don't know what made me do it. My boots moved before my mind did. I stepped into the open, raised my voice above the chaos. $3, I said. Heads turned. The auctioneer froze, disbelief painted on his face. Sold, he barked, maybe afraid I'd change my mind. They shoved her toward me. The chain clattered in my hand, cold and heavy. She looked at me with fire in her eyes. "You think you own me?" "No," I said. "I think I just bought you time to live." We didn't run, we walked. Past the broken wagons, past the men too shocked to stop us. The war-torn camp burned behind us, the smell of smoke following like a curse. By dusk, we were miles from that place. I found an old ridge for cover and built a small fire. She sat across from me, her wrists still chained, her stare unyielding. "You're a fool," she said. "Maybe," I answered. "But at least you're alive to tell me that." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The desert wind hissed between us, carrying the sound of distant screams, the kind you never forget. Finally, she asked, quieter this time, "Why $3? "Because that's all I had," I said. "And because freedom should never be free." She turned away, but I saw the flicker, the smallest crack in her armor. Maybe she didn't believe in mercy. Maybe she'd forgotten what it looked like. But that night, as the firelight danced on her chains, I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't saved her, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could save me. The sun rose like a blade, cutting through the horizon. By dawn, the trail behind us was already crawling with riders. I could see their dust rising, a faint brown scar in the distance. They'd realized she was gone, and they'd come to take her back. We had no horses, just 2 canteens and a stretch of wasteland that could swallow armies. Every step crunched against the sand like broken glass. She didn't complain, didn't even ask where we were going. The chain around her wrists gleamed in the light, but her spine stayed straight. "They won't stop," I said. "I know," she replied. Her voice was calm, too calm. "You sound almost ready for them." "I've been running my whole life," she said. "If they catch me again, I'll make them regret it." There was something in her tone that made me believe it. We stopped near a cluster of rocks, the only shade for miles. I scanned the horizon with my rifle, counting how long we had. Maybe an hour, maybe less. She watched me reload, her eyes sharp and unreadable. "You're a soldier," she said. "Was," I answered. "Then why save me? You should know mercy gets men killed." "Maybe I've already died once," I said quietly. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying the sound of hooves. Closer now, too close. I dropped flat against the sand, motioning for her to do the same. She didn't hesitate. For a heartbeat, we lay there, breathing dust and silence. Then, the first rider appeared, a black silhouette against the sun. He was scouting ahead, his rifle glinting. I aimed slow, steady. My finger tightened. A single shot cracked through the stillness. The man fell. His horse bolted into the horizon. She turned her head toward me, not afraid, just studying me like I was a puzzle. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No." "Then you're not as broken as you think. The others would come soon, maybe 5, maybe 10. We couldn't fight them all." I unchained her wrists with my knife. The metal snapped, the sound sharp as thunder in the silence. She rubbed the raw skin, eyes wide with disbelief. "Don't thank me," I said. "You'll need both hands where we're going." She didn't smile, but her jaw tightened, determination replacing anger. "Then stop talking," she said. "Let's survive." We ran. Sand tore at our boots, the wind screaming behind us. Bullets started to echo in the distance, wild, desperate shots. One hit the rock beside me, sending shards into my arm. I didn't stop. Neither did she. We dove behind a ridge just as another shot rang out. The bullet missed by inches. She looked at me, chest heaving, eyes blazing with fire. "If this is your idea of saving me," she said, "you're terrible at it." I laughed, the first laugh I'd had in months. "You're welcome anyway." The riders' voices grew louder. The desert had become a hunting ground, and we were the prey. But for the first time, I wasn't running from my past. I was running with it. We reached the ruins by sunset. The desert swallowed the last light, painting the world in rust and shadow. What used to be a caravan station now stood half buried in sand. Stone walls leaning like old bones. A broken well yawning in the center. "This place is dead," she said, scanning the ruins. "Then we'll fit right in," I answered. We slipped inside, moving between collapsed arches and shattered jars. The silence was thick, but not peaceful, the kind of silence that hides danger. I checked the corners, loaded my last 2 bullets, and handed her a knife. She weighed it in her palm like it was an old friend. "You trust me with this?" she asked. "If I didn't, you'd already have it," I said. A faint smile touched her lips, the first one I'd seen. We waited. The wind carried the echo of hoofs. They were close now, maybe minutes away. I could feel the tension in my chest, the slow rhythm of a heart that had survived too much. She crouched beside me, eyes fixed on the ridge beyond the ruins. "How many?" "6, I said. "Maybe 7? "That's too many. That's what makes it fair." We set the trap together. I tied one of the broken lanterns near the doorway, rigged with gunpowder from a cracked cartridge. She spread sand over our tracks and found a position near the well. Watching her move quiet, precise, I realized she'd been through this before. This wasn't fear. It was instinct. When the first horseman entered the ruins, the lantern flickered, then exploded. The blast threw sand and smoke into the air. I fired twice, hit one man in the chest, another in the leg. The rest shouted, blind in the dust. She moved like lightning, slipping behind one of them and driving the knife home, silent and clean. Gunfire echoed through the night. Sparks lit the walls. My ears rang, and for a moment, I thought the world was ending again, just like before. Then it was quiet. She stood over one of the fallen men, breathing hard, blood streaked across her arm. I lowered my gun, the last shell spent. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, though her hands trembled. Still standing, we dragged the bodies outside and covered them with sand. The stars were burning bright above us, cold, indifferent witnesses. When it was over, she sank to the ground beside the broken well. I joined her. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, alive with things unsaid. She looked at me. "You didn't have to stay and fight." "I know." "Then why did you?" "Because running only works if you've got something left to run for." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, barely audible, "My name is Katari." It was the first time she'd told me. I didn't answer, not yet. But for the first time since the war, I felt something break open inside me, something dangerously close to hope. The desert stretched forever. 3 days without shade, 2 without food. The sun didn't rise, it hunted us. Every grain of sand felt like a burning nail driven into our skin. The air shimmered, heavy and cruel. Katari walked ahead, silent, steady. Her feet bled through the worn leather of her boots, but she didn't slow down. Not once. She never asked how far, never looked back. I tried to keep up, my canteen already empty. Each swallow of air felt like swallowing fire. At dusk, we stopped near a cluster of jagged rocks, the only thing between us and the endless horizon. I dropped my pack, my body shaking. She didn't sit. She just looked east, toward the dying light. "They'll stop following us soon," I said. "No," she answered. "Men like that don't stop. They only sleep." Her voice was dry as the wind, but I could hear the exhaustion behind it. I wanted to tell her to rest, but something in her eyes warned me not to. She didn't trust rest, maybe because rest had always betrayed her. I tore a strip from my sleeve, dipped it in the last drops of water, and handed it to her. "Here," I said, "for your hands." She hesitated, then took it. "Why?" "Because you'll need them," I said. "We're not done yet." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded once. It wasn't gratitude, not yet, but it was close enough. That night, the wind carried whispers. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the dunes. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the faces of the men we'd left buried in sand. When I looked over, Katari was awake too. She sat by the dying fire knife, resting on her knees. "Who were you before all this?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. The flames danced across her face, tired, proud, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness. "I was a daughter," she said finally. "A sister, a hunter." Her gaze drifted to the stars. "Then one night, they came. Took everything. Burned the rest." I didn't ask more. I already knew the sound of loss. "You?" she asked quietly. "A soldier," I said. "The kind that fought for the wrong side too long." She studied me, and for the first time, I didn't look away. "Then we both carry ghosts," she said. The fire faded. The stars pulsed like cold eyes watching from above. Before I drifted into half-sleep, I heard her whisper something in her native tongue, soft, broken, like a prayer or a promise. I didn't understand the words, but I knew what they meant. In the heart of the desert, 2 people who'd lost everything were learning what it meant to survive together. By noon, the sky turned the color of brass. The wind picked up, first a whisper, then a roar. I knew that sound. A sandstorm, fast, ruthless. "Move!" I shouted. Katari didn't ask why. She grabbed her pack and followed. The horizon vanished behind a wall of gold and ash. The storm hit us like a living thing, claws of dust tearing at our skin, sand slashing our eyes. We wrapped our faces, bent low, fought for every breath. The desert howled. I couldn't see her, only her silhouette flashing through the storm. I reached for her hand, felt her fingers for a heartbeat, then nothing. I yelled, but the wind stole her name. My world became noise and pain. I pushed forward blindly, every step like walking into a wall. When I finally stumbled into a hollow between two dunes, I collapsed, half buried, choking. Then a shadow moved above me. She was there. Sand plastered to her face, blood on her lip, but alive. She threw a blanket over us, pinned it down with rocks. The world outside raged, but inside our small cave of fabric, there was breath, barely. She coughed, voice raw. "You would have died out there." "Would've," I said, "but you found me." Her eyes met mine in the dim light. "You're heavier than you look, and you're stronger than you seem." For a moment, the storm became background noise, like the desert itself was holding its breath around us. I could feel her heartbeat under the roar, steady, defiant. Hours passed before the wind began to fade. When we finally crawled out, the world was different. The dunes reshaped, the tracks gone. The sun broke through again, merciless as ever. We kept walking. By late afternoon, we found it what was left of a caravan. Burned wagons, dead camels, scattered crates picked clean by vultures. Katari moved carefully among the wreckage, searching. "Bandits," she said quietly. "Not long ago, I knelt by one of the bodies. A merchant, maybe." His hand still clutched a water flask. I reached for it, but Katari stopped me. "Don't," she said. "It's poisoned." "How do you know?" She pointed at a stain near the mouthpiece. "They use snake venom. Keeps scavengers from drinking." I dropped it fast. We found a single loaf of dried bread in one of the wagons, stale, cracked, but real food. I broke it in half, handed her a piece. She hesitated again, then took it. We ate in silence. Every bite tasted like dust, but it was life. As the sun bled out across the horizon, she turned to me. "How far to the trading post?" "2, maybe 3 days," I said. "If we make it, we will," I told her. "We didn't come this far to die halfway." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the dying light. "You talk like a man who still believes in redemption." "Maybe I just believe in debts," I said. "And I still owe you one." She didn't argue. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of burned wood and old blood. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a single crow circled. The wind changed the next morning, colder, sharper. The dunes began to thin, giving way to red rock and twisted cliffs. We'd reached the edge of the desert, the place where the mountains rose like the bones of the earth. Katari walked beside me, her steps slower now. The heat had taken its toll, lips cracked, skin burned. But her eyes hadn't dimmed. If anything, they burned brighter. "Almost there," I said, though I didn't know where there was anymore. She didn't answer. By midday, we found the first sign of life: smoke. Faint, rising from a canyon below. I crouched behind a ridge, rifle ready. Katari leaned beside me. "Could be raiders," I said. "Could be survivors," she replied. We moved quietly along the rocks, our shadows crawling beside us. As we drew closer, the shapes came into view. Not soldiers, not men, children, a dozen of them, huddled around a dying fire. Faces hollow, clothes torn, eyes far older than they should have been. Katari froze. Her breath caught. She stepped forward before I could stop her. "Wait," I whispered. But she was already moving. When the children saw her, some backed away, others just stared. One, A small boy with a scar across his cheek held up a wooden stick like a weapon. "It's all right," she said softly. "We're not here to hurt you." They didn't answer. Not until one of the older girls, maybe 12, spoke. "You're from the village." Katari's voice broke just a little. That one word changed everything. The stick lowered. The fear eased. The children began to gather around her, drawn by something invisible, maybe her strength, maybe the way she looked at them like they still mattered. I stayed back, watching. She knelt beside the smallest one, a boy barely 5, and brushed the dust from his face. The way her hands trembled told me everything. "Where are your parents?" she asked quietly. The girl shook her head. "Gone, taken when the soldiers came." Katari closed her eyes, fighting whatever storm was behind them. I saw her swallow hard before speaking again. "You're safe now. We'll get you to the trading post." I stepped forward then. "We'll need to move before dark," I said. "There's water in the rocks, maybe enough for the night." The children looked at me, wary, uncertain. One boy whispered, "Who's he?" Katari stood, her shadow long in the setting sun. "He's the one who bought me my freedom," she said. "And now he's going to help us find yours." I didn't deserve the words, but I didn't argue. The truth was simpler. I didn't save her. She'd saved herself, and now she was saving them. As the night fell, we gathered the children near the fire. They huddled close, their small bodies shaking in the cold. Katari sang something under her breath, a lullaby. Maybe in a language I couldn't understand. For the first time in a long while, the desert didn't feel dead. It felt like it was listening. And somewhere deep inside, so was I. We left before sunrise. The canyon still slept, the air cold enough to bite. I carried the smallest boy on my shoulders. He barely weighed more than my rifle. Katari led the group, her voice calm but firm, guiding the children one by one up the narrow trail. The mountains were cruel. The path twisted like a scar through the rock, and every step felt like walking the edge of a blade. But the kids didn't cry. They moved in silence, their fear tucked deep behind dry lips and hollow eyes. By midday, the wind shifted again. Katari stopped suddenly, raising her hand. I followed her gaze, movement on the ridge above. 3 riders, watching. I pulled the children into the shade of a boulder. Katari crawled beside me, eyes narrowed. "Scouts," she whispered. "They're tracking us. From the auction." She nodded. Or worse. We waited, breath held, hearts pounding. The riders moved slowly along the ridge, scanning the canyon below. One dismounted, studying the sand. My pulse thudded in my ears. If they saw us, it was over. Katari's hand brushed mine, not in fear, but warning. She shook her head. Not yet. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the riders turned and disappeared over the rise. We stayed still until the sound of hooves faded. When I finally exhaled, my chest ached from holding it. "Move," Katari said. "Fast." We pushed onward. The trail climbed higher, the rocks sharper underfoot. The children stumbled, but Katari never stopped encouraging them. When one fell, she lifted him. When another began to cry, she pressed his hand against her chest and whispered, "Hear that? That's a heart still fighting. Keep yours doing the same." I watched her and realized I'd never seen anyone lead like that. Not with power, with purpose. By evening, clouds gathered, thick and gray. A storm was coming, the kind that turns the mountains into rivers. We found a shallow cave just as the rain began to fall. I got the fire going with the last of our kindling. smoke curling against the cold stone walls. The children huddled around it, half asleep, half dreaming. Katari sat across from me, hair damp, face streaked with dirt and rain. "They'll keep hunting us," I said. "I know. They won't stop just because we have children." She looked into the flames. "Then we won't stop either." For a long while, the only sound was rain. Then she said, "When I was taken, I swore no one would ever own me again. But freedom means nothing if it's just mine." Her words hung in the air, heavy and true. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains. Inside, the fire burned small but stubborn. The children slept. And for the first time since the war, I wasn't thinking about how to survive. I was thinking about what it meant to deserve it. We reached the ridge at dawn. The rain had passed, but the mountains still bled mist from their wounds. Below us stretched a valley wide, silent, and somewhere beyond it, the trading post, safety, or something close to it. Katari stood beside me, cloak torn, eyes fixed on the horizon. The children huddled near the rocks, too tired to move. I counted them again, 12. 12 small reasons not to die today. Then I heard it, the sound I'd feared since the desert hooves, distant, echoing up the trail like thunder on stone. Katari turned to me. She didn't need to speak. We both knew. They'd found us. I scanned the ridge. "We'll never outrun them here." "Then we don't run," she said. Her voice was steel. I saw in her what the auctioneer never did, a warrior. Born not of vengeance, but of necessity. We moved fast. I sent the children with the oldest girl, Mira, down the narrow ravine behind the rocks. "Follow the stream," I told her. "Don't stop until the sun sets. We'll find you." She nodded, tears streaking her face, but didn't argue. Children who've seen war don't waste time with questions. When the last of them disappeared into the canyon, Katari looked at me. "How many bullets?" "For enough," she said. The first riders appeared through the mist, 6 of them, rifles drawn. I felt my pulse slow, the way it always did before a fight. The world narrowed to movement and sound. The rhythm of breath, the click of the hammer, the beat between life and death. I fired first. The echo shattered the stillness. One man fell from his horse. The others spread wide, returning fire. Bullets sparked off the rocks, the air thick with dust and smoke. Katari moved beside me fast, deliberate. She grabbed a fallen stone and hurled it at one of the riders, knocking him from the saddle. Another bullet grazed her arm, tearing fabric and skin. She didn't flinch. She just reloaded my rifle and handed it back. "Shoot," she said. "I'll draw them in. Trust me." Before I could stop her, she was running, darting between the rocks, her figure a blur against the gray light. The riders turned their guns toward her, shouting. I aimed, fired twice more to clean hits. The third rider spun, crashed into the dirt. The last of them charged. I dropped behind the ridge, yanked my knife free. He came over the rise, rifle raised too slow. I caught him by the collar, drove the blade up beneath his ribs. His body jerked once, then stilled. Silence returned, heavy, absolute. Katari limped toward me, blood dark on her sleeve. "You're bleeding," I said. "So are you. Mine's not important." She smirked faintly. "Neither's mine." We stood among the bodies, breath ragged, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder and wet earth. Below, in the canyon, a distant cry, Mira's voice. The children were still alive. Katari looked at me. "They'll send more," she said. The valley was darker than I remembered. clouds smothered the sun, and the air smelled of rain and blood. Katari moved beside me, her arm bound with a strip torn from my shirt. Steps steady despite the pain. We followed the narrow stream through the canyon, footprints vanishing with the current. By dusk, we found them, the children, huddled beneath a fallen arch of stone. Mira ran to us, tears shining on her face. "They came back," she whispered. "Riders, we hid, like you said." I counted quickly, 12. All alive. Relief washed through me like breath after drowning, but it didn't last. Behind us, the echo of hooves again. Katari's jaw clenched. "More of them." "Too many," I said. They split their men. The canyon narrowed ahead into a single pass. If they caught us here, it was over. I scanned the walls, loose rock, unstable, hanging heavy over the gap. A plan formed fast, cruel, but the only one that could work. "Take the children," I said. "Head east until you see the ruins. There's shelter." She looked at me, reading my thoughts before I spoke the rest. "No," she said. "Yes. You'll die here. Someone has to make sure they don't." Her eyes burned, anger, grief, everything she'd never said. "You don't get to decide that alone." "I'm not deciding," I said. "I'm buying time, like I did before." The sound of hooves grew louder, closer, 30 seconds away, maybe less. Katari grabbed my arm, her voice low and fierce. "You think you're the only one who can stand and fight? I think you're the only one they need to live." For a heartbeat, we just stood there to people who'd come from nothing, now holding everything that mattered. Then she nodded once, sharp and silent. "Don't miss," she said. "I never do." She turned, shouting orders to the children, her voice cutting through fear like a blade. I climbed the rocks above the pass, my hands slick with dust and sweat. The riders came into view, dark shapes against the dying light. When the first reached the narrowest point, I fired. The bullet struck the ridge above him, shattering the rock. The whole wall groaned, then broke. A cascade of stone thundered down, swallowing the path in a storm of dust and screams. I ducked behind a ledge as the canyon shook. The world blurred, sound, light, and smoke mixing into chaos. When it cleared, the pass was gone. So were the riders. I coughed, throat raw, body trembling. Katari's voice echoed faintly below. "Lucas." I tried to answer, but my lungs refused. The edge beneath me crumbled, and I slid down the slope, crashing hard into the sand. She was there in seconds, pulling me up, fury and fear tangled in her eyes. "Idiot," she hissed. "Worked, didn't it?" She pressed her forehead to mine, breath shaking. "Don't do that again." "I'll try," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. We reached the outpost at dawn. It rose from the desert like a scar, weathered walls of clay and wood. A flag torn to rags, the faint smell of smoke and trade. For the first time in weeks, I saw signs of life that didn't want to kill us. The guards at the gates stared when they saw us. 2 half-dead wanderers leading a line of 12 children. One of them raised his rifle. Katari stepped forward, voice firm. "We're not here to beg. Just shelter. And water." Something in her tone made them hesitate. Then an older man appeared, white beard, sunburned skin, eyes that had seen too many winters. He studied us for a long moment. "Bring them in," he said finally. "They look more like ghosts than trouble." Inside, the air was cooler. Merchants shouted over crates of grain and cloth. Traders haggled under the shade of canvas roofs. It should have felt like safety. Instead, it felt like memory, the kind that hides a knife behind a smile. The children were fed, washed, given a place to rest. Katari stayed with them, her hands never still, her eyes never softening. I watched from across the courtyard, leaning against a post. The old man approached me. "Your woman's got fire," he said. "She's not mine." He chuckled. "No one like her ever is." He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to me. "You brought them out of the wasteland. That makes you a good man." I took a sip. It burned going down to clean, to real. Good isn't what got us this far. His eyes narrowed. "You're being followed." I froze. "How do you know?" He nodded toward the gate. "Because I've seen that look before. Men who run from the desert don't come out clean. They come out hunted." The words settled heavy in my gut. I turned toward Katari. She must have felt it too, because she was already looking back, reading me like a mirror. Night fell fast. The children slept in the storeroom, wrapped in borrowed blankets. The post was quiet, but the silence didn't feel safe. I sat outside, cleaning my rifle, when Katari joined me. "They know," I said. "I figured," she replied. "Places like this survive by selling secrets. Then we should move before dawn." She shook her head. "They're too tired. They need a night without running." I wanted to argue, but I saw her hands trembling just enough to betray her exhaustion. She'd carried all of them this far, and she wasn't asking for rest for herself. I reached for my bag, pulling out the last bullet. The casing was dented, nearly useless, but I slipped it into the rifle anyway. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Preparing." "For what?" "For whoever's still following." She looked out toward the dunes, where the wind whispered like something alive. "You think they'll come?" "They always do." She was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "If they take me again, don't stop them. Save the children." I turned to her, anger sparking. "Don't say that." The first shot came before sunrise. A single crack tore through the silence, sharp, distant, but close enough to make the walls tremble. I was already awake. "You don't survive this long by sleeping deeply." Katari was beside the children, blade in hand, eyes like cold fire. I met her gaze and didn't have to say a word. We both knew it had come. The desert had finally caught up. I pushed open the door and stepped into the gray light. Riders 6, maybe 7, cutting through the mist toward the outpost. The guards shouted, scrambling to lock the gate. But it was too late. These men weren't here to trade. "Get them inside," I yelled. The children scattered toward the storeroom, Mira pulling the smallest by the hand. Katari stayed beside me. Of course she did. The first rider broke through the fence. I fired once, the recoil kicking through my shoulder. He dropped. Another took his place. Bullets sparked off the clay walls. The outpost erupted into chaos screams. Smoke, the smell of gunpowder and dust. Katari moved like she'd been born for this. She struck one man from his horse, turned his own blade against him before he could scream. But there were too many. They came like shadows, relentless. We fell back toward the storeroom. The children huddled inside, silent. "They're almost through," I said. "Then we end it here," she replied. I looked at her, really looked. Blood streaked her face, but her eyes were steady. No fear, just resolve. "If one of us stays, the other can lead them out," I said. She frowned. "We're not doing that again. This time, it's not a choice." Outside, the door shook under another blow. I pressed the rifle into her hands. "You know the trail east. The ruins. Take them there." She stared at the weapon, then at me. "Lucas, Please. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse. Then she nodded, slow and deliberate. Don't make this a sacrifice, she said. Make it mean something. I smiled, a broken thing, but real. Always do. She turned to the children. Quiet now, she whispered. Follow me. Don't look back. When the back wall gave way to the outside, she led them through the cracks, one by one, vanishing into the pale dawn. I waited until the last shadow disappeared, then reloaded the last bullet. The door burst open. The first man through didn't even see me. The shot echoed like thunder, then silence. I dropped the empty rifle, drew my knife, and met the second man head up. There's no poetry in dying. Just sound, and heat, and the weight of your own heartbeat. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Because somewhere beyond that burning horizon, 12 children and one fierce woman were still free. When the world finally went quiet, I found myself on the floor, breath shallow, light fading. Through the broken wall, I saw the sky, streaks of red and gold spilling over the desert. I thought of Qatari's voice, calm and defiant. Freedom means nothing if it's just mine. And I smiled.
The winter winds howled across the plains like a wounded beast, carrying with them the scent of pine and death. The year was 1878, deep in the rugged lands near the Wyoming border, where only the desperate or the damned chose to live. Through the swirling snow, a woman trudged forward, her face pale, her breath ragged. In her arms she held a small bundle wrapped in an old wool blanket. Her name was Clara Weston, and for 3 days she had walked through the wilderness, chasing the faint hope that someone, anyone, would take pity on her dying child. The child's name was Hannah, a girl no older than 6, feverish and barely breathing. The townsfolk of Dead River had turned Clara away. Half-blood, they called the child, whispering cruel words about her father, a man from a nearby native tribe. No doctor would touch the girl. No preacher would pray over her. By the 4th night, Clara's strength gave out. The storm had thickened to a blinding white wall, and she could no longer tell east from west. Then, through the blur of snow, she saw smoke, a faint gray ribbon rising from the pines, a cabin. When she reached the door, she didn't knock at first. She simply stood there, her lips trembling, whispering words she could barely say. Please, help me bury her. Inside the cabin, Jonah Hale, a man in his 40s with the eyes of someone who had seen too much, froze at the sound. For 10 years, Jonah had lived alone, a hunter, a recluse, a man who'd once worn the blue coat of the Union Army and now wanted nothing more than silence. His wife, a Shoshone woman, had been killed years ago by the same kind of men who now filled the towns with their laws and hatred. When Jonah opened the door, the sight before him stopped his breath. The woman's hair was white with frost, her arms shaking under the child's weight. He didn't speak at first, only motioned her inside. The heat of the fire seemed to fight with the cold that had claimed Clara's bones. She laid the child on the floor by the fire, unwrapped the blanket, and Jonah's world tilted. The girl's chest, it moved. Barely, but it moved. She's still alive, he said quietly. Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. No, I saw her stop breathing. I saw. Jonah knelt beside the girl, feeling the faintest pulse. His hands, rough from years of solitude, began to work almost instinctively, checking her skin, her heartbeat, her breath. The old surgeon in him, the man he had buried under layers of guilt and whiskey, came alive again. As the night wore on, Clara watched him, a stranger who spoke few words, yet carried an invisible pain deeper than anyone she could see. And in that lonely mountain cabin, surrounded by snow and ghosts, a spark of life flickered back to the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night, the night Clara Weston came to bury her child, would be the beginning of everything. Morning came slowly, crawling over the peaks like a wounded animal. Snow still fell, soft and silent now, burying the tracks that led to Jonah's cabin. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of smoke, pine, and medicine. Clara woke to the crackle of the fire. For the first few seconds, she didn't know where she was. Only the dull ache in her arms reminded her of the child she still held. Then she heard a weak cough. Hannah. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever but alive. A sound escaped Clara's throat, half sob, half prayer. She leaned over, pressing her lips to the child's forehead. "You're here, my sweet girl. You're still here." From across the room, Jonah's deep voice broke the silence. "She's burning up, but her pulse is steady. The worst of the cold's past." Clara turned toward him. He was sitting by the table, mixing something in a tin cup, a murky liquid that smelled of herbs and smoke. His hands were steady, though his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept all night. "You're a doctor?" she asked, still dazed. Jonah didn't look up. "Used to be. Army surgeon back before the war ended, and the world went to hell." He handed her the cup. "Get her to drink this. It'll break the fever." Clara hesitated for only a moment before lifting Hannah gently. The child's lips trembled as the bitter mixture touched her tongue, but she swallowed. Jonah watched silently, his jaw tightening as if fighting memories that clawed at the edges of his mind. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, the only witness to two broken souls learning to breathe again. Clara looked around the cabin. It was simple but built with care, shelves lined with dried herbs, a rifle over the door, a Bible gathering dust on the table. Everything about the place spoke of solitude and pain. "You live out here alone?" she asked quietly. Jonah nodded. "Ain't much reason to go back down there. People down in Dead River, they don't take kindly to strangers." Clara lowered her gaze. "They didn't take kindly to me either." Her words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Jonah didn't ask for details. He already knew the type of cruelty that came from men who called themselves civilized. For a moment, there was only the sound of fire and wind. Then Jonah spoke again, softer this time. "Rest while you can. The storm's not done yet. You'll need your strength if you're planning to leave." Clara's voice trembled. "I wasn't planning to." Jonah looked at her for the first time, really looked. The stubbornness in her eyes, the bruises of loss, the fragile courage that somehow refused to die. Outside, the storm howled again. But inside the small cabin, something else began to stir, not the warmth of fire, but the first fragile spark of trust. Night returned swiftly, covering the mountains in deep blue shadows. The wind outside screamed against the wooden walls like the voices of the lost. Inside, the fire burned lower, throwing long orange ribbons across the room. Jonah sat by the hearth, sharpening his knife. The rhythmic scrape of steel filled the silence. Clara watched from the corner, cradling Hannah, who had finally drifted into a fragile sleep. "She's resting easier," Clara whispered, as if afraid to disturb the air. Jonah nodded but didn't look up. "She's strong, stronger than most grown men I've known." Clara smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Her father was strong too. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jonah's hand froze mid-motion, his eyes lifting slowly to meet hers. "He was Shawnee," she said after a pause, voice trembling but defiant. "The town never forgave me for loving him. They said I betrayed my own kind. When he died, they made sure I paid the price." Jonah set the knife down, the steel gleaming in the firelight. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "They'll find any excuse to hate what they don't understand." Clara looked at him, studying the deep lines on his face, the kind carved by grief, not time. "You sound like you know something about that." Jonah stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "My wife was Shoshone. They killed her because she wore my name." The air between them turned heavy, the kind that carried pain too deep for words. For a moment, Neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, as if it too was mourning the ghosts that filled the cabin. Finally, Clara said quietly, "I'm sorry." Jonah gave a slow nod. "You don't have to be. The world don't change easy. But sometimes it gives you one more chance to set things right." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the storm. The snow had eased, the moon faintly breaking through torn clouds. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll take you to the creek. There's clean water and roots we can boil for her. The fever needs to run its course." Clara's eyes softened. "You don't have to help us." Jonah turned back, his voice low but steady. "I already didn't help once. Never again." He didn't explain, and she didn't ask, but she saw it, the grief buried behind his eyes. The kind only a man who'd lost everything could carry. That night, as Clara drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she thought she heard another sound beneath the wind, not the storm, but the slow, steady rhythm of life returning. Hannah's breathing was deeper now, stronger. Her tiny hand reached out in her sleep, grasping her mother's finger. Outside, the snow began to fall gently again, soft and forgiving, as if the mountains themselves were watching over them. For the first time in many years, Jonah Hale felt something stir within his chest, something he thought the war, the hatred, and the loneliness had burned away forever. Hope. The dawn broke slow and gray. The world outside Jonah's cabin buried under a fresh blanket of snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt sacred. Only the distant caw of a raven broke the stillness. Clara stirred near the fire, rubbing her stiff hands together. Her daughter still slept, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Jonah had been up since before dawn, his silhouette framed against the frosted window as he prepared their morning fire. When Clara rose, he spoke without turning. "Bundle the girl. We're going to the creek." She blinked, confused. "Now, it's freezing." Jonah glanced over his shoulder, his eyes steady. "That's when the water's cleanest. We'll need it for her fever. And you'll need to walk. After nights like these, people freeze not from cold, but from sitting too long." There was no arguing with him. She wrapped Hannah tightly in wool, tucked her close, and followed him outside. The cold bit deep. The world glittered in silver and white. Every step crunched in the snow. The creek lay a quarter-mile down the slope, its surface half frozen, steam rising where water still ran free beneath the ice. Jonah knelt, chopping a hole with his hatchet, his movements slow but precise. Clara stood nearby, watching him, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "You've lived here long?" she asked softly. 10 years, Jonah said without looking up. "Long enough to know when the land's angry, and when it forgives." She knelt beside him, peering into the water as he filled the canteens. "Why stay? You could have gone anywhere." Jonah paused, eyes on the reflection of his scarred face in the dark water. "I did go. Nowhere worth staying. The mountains? They don't lie to you. They take what they want and leave you with what you've earned." Clara studied him, the thick fur draped across his shoulders, the worn leather gloves, the quiet strength in every movement. There was something tragic and noble about him, something carved from the same stone as the peaks around them. As they turned to head back, Hannah stirred weakly, murmuring something in her sleep. Clara smiled, tightening her hold. "She's stronger today." Jonah gave a small nod. "She's fighting. That's good. The world don't make room for quitters." They walked in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots, smoke from the cabin curling upward in the distance. For a moment, it almost looked like peace. When they reached the door, Jonah stopped. His eyes drifted toward the tree line. Clara followed his gaze. "What is it?" "Tracks," he said quietly. "Fresh ones. Human." The prince led toward the cabin from the south ridge, not from any deer or wolf. Jonah's hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning by the door. His voice dropped low, calm but cold. "Someone's been here." Clara clutched Hannah tighter, her heartbeat quickening. Jonah crouched beside the prince, his gloved fingers brushing lightly over the snow. The edges were clean, not yet softened by wind, Someone had been there less than an hour ago. He followed the trail with his eyes until it vanished into the pine line. One rider, he muttered. Maybe two. Horses were tired. Whoever it was, they weren't hunting. Clara stood by the door, Hannah clinging weakly to her shoulder. You think they were looking for us? Jonah shook his head slowly, though the tension in his jaw said otherwise. Could be trappers. Could be worse. He rose to his full height, scanning the ridge one last time before pulling the door shut behind them. The warmth of the fire returned, but the comfort was gone. Clara set Hannah back near the hearth, covering her with blankets. I don't understand. We're miles from the nearest town. Jonah checked his rifle, loading a fresh round. That's exactly why I had built this place here. For a long while, there was only the sound of the fire. Then Clara asked quietly, who would come all the way out here in a storm like this? Jonah hesitated before answering. The kind of men who don't care about weather or God. He didn't say the rest, that once, years ago, those same kind of men had ridden up another mountain just like this one, that they had burned his home and taken everything he loved. He'd buried the past under snow and silence, but the mountains had long memories. Clara sensed the shift in him, the way his voice hardened. You think they're coming for you? He gave a small, humorless laugh. No one comes for a ghost. Still, he checked the shutters, the back door, the rifle near the table. The soldier in him, the part he tried to bury, was awake again. As the day wore on, the sky darkened. Snow began to fall once more, gentler this time. But Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that something watched from the trees. Clara moved quietly, tending to Hannah, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. She tried to act calm, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. At dusk, Jonah stepped outside again. The air was deathly still, the kind that carries secrets. He knelt by the tree line where the tracks had been. They were fading now, filling with snow, but near one of them, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A fragment of cloth torn and half frozen into the ice. Dark red plaid, a pattern he remembered too well. He clenched it in his fist, staring at it as if the ears had collapsed into a single breath. Everett, he whispered. The name hit the air like a curse. When he came back inside, Clara saw the change in him immediately. His shoulders were rigid, his eyes distant, haunted. Jonah, what is it? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fear behind his calm. A man I once buried. Looks like he didn't stay that way. By the next morning, the storm had passed again, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. Even the ravens had gone silent. Jonah stood by the window, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. A thin line of smoke curled against the pale sky, too far to be from their fire, too straight to be natural. Someone was out there. Clara noticed his tension. You saw them, didn't you? He nodded once. 3 riders. Maybe 4. Moving slow, staying low. They're not hunters. Clara's heart clenched. You think it's... And Jonah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. He began to move with quiet precision, like a man who had done this many times before. He checked the rifle, reloaded his revolver, then crossed to the back door, securing the latch with an iron bar. Clara followed in. What do we do? You do nothing, he said firmly. You keep that fire low. Keep the girl quiet. And if I tell you to run, you run. Outside, the crunch of hooves broke the silence. The sound was distant, but coming closer, the slow, deliberate rhythm of men who weren't afraid to be heard. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, snow squeaking beneath his boots. The horizon glowed faintly gold from the morning sun, but the light only made the figures in the distance clearer. 4 riders in long coats, their horses pushing through the snow like shadows from another world. He recognized the one in front instantly, Thomas Everett. The years had changed him, his beard streaked with gray, his hat lower, but his arrogance was the same. The man who'd once led the raid that killed. Jonah's wife now rode with that same crooked smile. Everett raised a hand in mock greeting. Jonah Hale, thought you were long buried under this mountain. Jonah's grip tightened around his rifle. Guess you didn't dig deep enough? Everett laughed. Still got that tongue. Good, I came for something else this time. There's a woman and a child. Folks in town say they ran this way. You seen 'em? Jonah's jaw flexed. Ain't seen no one but ghosts? Everett tilted his head. Ghosts? Maybe that's what you've been keeping company with all these years. The other men chuckled, their laughter cold as the wind. Jonah said nothing. His eyes never left Everett's hands. He saw the twitch, the subtle shift before the draw. Don't, Jonah said quietly. Everett smiled wider. You always were quick, Hale. Let's see if time slowed you down. The world moved in a single breath. Everett's hand darted toward his holster. But Jonah was faster. A thunderous crack split the still air. Everett's hat flew from his head as the bullet grazed it clean. Next one, Jonah said, voice low, ain't for warning. The men froze. For a long, terrible second, no one moved. Then Everett raised a hand, signaling them back. You got guts, old man, he called, retreating slowly. But we'll be back. You can't guard ghosts forever. The sun was sinking behind the peaks, casting long crimson shadows across the valley. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, thick with fear, smoke, and quiet determination. Jonah moved with calm precision, the way a man does when every motion could be his last. He pulled a table against the door, reinforced the shutters with timber, and checked each window slit where a rifle could fit. Clara watched him silently, her hands shaking as she wrapped blankets around Hannah. The little girl slept deeply, exhausted but peaceful, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the walls. Will they come back tonight? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jonah didn't stop working. If I were them, I'd wait for dark. Fear does half the work for you when the light dies. He looked up then, meeting her eyes. You're not to make a sound if they come close. No matter what you hear. You understand? Clara nodded, her throat tight. And you? He smiled faintly, a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'll be busy. She wanted to argue, to beg him to run, to say that vengeance wasn't worth dying for. But one look at him silenced her. This was a man who'd already lost everything once. Now, protecting them wasn't duty. It was redemption. Jonah poured kerosene into an old lantern and lit it. The flame flickered weakly, dancing shadows across his face. He took a deep breath and said quietly, they burned my home once. Killed her for wearing my name. I swore I'd never let it happen again. Clara stepped closer, the firelight soft on her face. Then you won't be fighting alone. Jonah looked at her, this fragile woman who had crossed a frozen wilderness, carrying her dying child, and somehow still found courage left to stand beside him. You ever used a rifle? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. My father taught me. Before the war. He handed her a small carbine from the wall, its metal worn but clean. Then you'll take the back window. Only shoot if they breach the porch. For a moment, their hands brushed rough, cold skin meeting warmth. In that small touch, something wordless passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the kind of understanding only born in survival. The last light faded from the window. Night fell, silent and merciless. Jonah doused the main fire, leaving only embers glowing faintly beneath the hearth. They'll see the smoke if it burns too bright, he murmured. Outside, the forest whispered. A branch snapped somewhere in the dark. Then another. Clara froze, eyes wide. Jonah? He raised a hand, signaling silence. Slowly, he moved to the door, rifle ready, his breath steady. The horse's hooves came first, faint but distinct, crunching snow in slow rhythm. Then came voices, laughter. Everett's drawl carried through the night. Didn't I say, boys? The mountain ghosts are still breathing. The first shot shattered the silence. The window splintered beside Clara's head, glass raining across the floor. She ducked instinctively, clutching her rifle tight to her chest. Hannah woke screaming, the sound small and terrified against the roaring wind outside. Jonah was already moving. He threw open the side window and fired into the dark. 1, 2, 3 shots. The muzzle flash lit the cabin like lightning, showing a glimpse of riders darting between the trees. "Down!" he shouted. Bullets ripped into the wooden walls, punching holes through the logs. Snow blew in through every crack. The smell of gunpowder and burning kerosene filled the air. Clara dragged Hannah behind the heavy table, shielding her with her body. Her hands shook, but she remembered his words, only shoot if they breached the porch. Outside, Everett's voice rang out above the storm. "Jonah Hale, thought you'd die alone up here. Guess we'll grant your wish tonight." Jonah's reply was a single shot, clean, deliberate. One of the men screamed and fell from his horse. The others spread out. Torches flared in the night, their orange glow reflecting off the snow. The cabin was surrounded now. Clara felt her heart hammering in her chest. She peeked over the table. Jonah reloaded with mechanical precision. Eyes narrowed, movements smooth and controlled. He wasn't panicking. He was at war again. Then came the smell of smoke. She turned toward the back wall. Flames flickered outside the window. "They're burning us out," she cried. Jonah swore under his breath, grabbing the bucket near the hearth and dousing the flames before they could spread inside. "Keep low." He kicked the back door open and rolled into the snow, firing at the shadows near the trees. 2 men broke cover, running toward the cabin with torches. Jonah dropped one before the second reached the porch. A gunshot cracked through the dark. Jonah staggered, a grazing hit along his arm. Blood stained the snow as he fell to one knee, teeth clenched against the pane. Inside, Clara saw him go down. For a heartbeat, fear froze her, then she grabbed the rifle and ran to the door. "Clara, stay inside," he shouted, but she didn't listen. She leveled the gun, aimed at the moving torchlight, and fired. The shot struck true. The second man fell backward into the snow, the torch extinguished beside him. Jonah looked at her, startled, then proud. "You shoot like you mean it." She reloaded, hands trembling. "You told me to wait until they were close." The standoff dragged on. The wind howled. The torches faded as Everett's men pulled back behind the ridge, shouting orders to each other. Jonah crouched beside Clara near the doorway. Blood trickled down his sleeve, but his focus wasn't broken. "They'll come again," he said. "When the wind shifts, they think we're scared." Clara looked at him, her breath misting in the cold. "Are we?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet." The night burned red. Everett's men came again, shouting, firing, their torches painting the snow with flame. Bullets tore through the walls, the air thick with smoke and splinters. The cabin groaned like a dying beast. Jonah ducked behind the window frame, returning fire. 2 men fell, another disappeared into the trees. But there were too many. He could see their shadows spreading out, circling for a final push. "Clara," he called, "take Hannah to the cellar, now." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll draw them off." "Go." Clara grabbed her daughter, half running, half crawling through the smoke toward the trapdoor. Hannah cried softly against her chest. The mother's heart ached with every sound, every footstep of gunfire above. Jonah reloaded, blood running from his shoulder where the bullet had grazed earlier. He kicked the door open and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like stone. Torches burned in a half circle around the cabin, Everett's men closing in. Grinning through the snow, Everett stood at the center, revolver in hand, his coat flapping in the wind like a flag of war. "You always were too proud to die easy, Hale," he shouted. Jonah raised his rifle. "And you always talk too much." He fired. Everett dove aside as the bullet ripped past, striking one of his men. Gunfire erupted, a chaos of light and thunder in the dark. Jonah moved with the precision of a soldier reborn, every shot deliberate, every step driven by memory and vengeance. Then, click, the rifle jammed. Everett saw his chance. He advanced through the storm, revolver steady, eyes cold. "End of the line, mountain man." Jonah dropped the useless rifle, drew his knife. "Come take it." They collided in the snow, the fight raw and brutal. Metal clashed, breath steaming in the frozen air. Everett's blade slashed Jonah's coat. Jonah drove his shoulder forward, tackling him into the drift. They rolled, punching, clawing, until Everett's revolver flew into the dark. Jonah pinned him down, knife pressed to his throat. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, only the wind screaming above them. Everett's eyes gleamed with hate. "You can't kill me, Hale. Killing me won't bring her back." Jonah's grip tightened. The knife trembled. "No," he said softly, "but it might let her rest." Then he drove the blade home. Everett gasped once, then went still. Jonah staggered back, chest heaving, blood and snow mixing at his feet. He looked up. Dawn was breaking through the trees, pale light spilling over the ridge. The gunfire had stopped. The surviving men had fled. The siege was over. Jonah dropped to one knee, exhausted. Smoke rose from the cabin, half burned, half standing. Inside, he heard the cellar door creak open. Clara emerged, holding Hannah close. Her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes shone with life. "It's over." Jonah nodded weakly. "It's over." Years passed quietly on the mountain. The winters came and went, carving the same valleys, painting the same forests white. Yet the cabin on the ridge no longer stood in silence. Smoke once again rose from its chimney, this time soft and steady. Not the angry plume of the siege, but the calm breath of life. Hannah had grown tall and strong, her once frail body now full of laughter. She moved easily through the pines, basket in hand, gathering herbs the way Jonah had taught her. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright as mountain water. Clara watched her from the porch, a faint smile on her lips. The years had marked her, small lines by her eyes, silver strands in her hair, but peace had made her beautiful in a different way. The fear was gone, replaced by quiet strength. Jonah was older too, his beard streaked with gray, his hands slower but steady. He split wood near the cabin, the axe swinging with practiced rhythm. The scars on his arms still ached when it rained, but he never complained. Life had become a collection of small, perfect rituals. The sound of chopping wood, the smell of stew simmering on the stove, the laughter of a girl who had once been near death. Sometimes at night, when the fire burned low, Jonah would sit outside with a cup of coffee and watch the stars climb above the ridge. The ghosts that once haunted him had grown quiet, not gone, but at peace. He had buried Everett's body in the valley below, under a pine tree. No marker, no name. "Let the mountain keep him," Jonah had said, and it did. Every spring, wildflowers grew there, blood red, stubborn against the melting snow. One evening, Hannah joined him by the fire, her voice curious. "Mama says you used to be a soldier." Jonah nodded slowly. "That was a long time ago." "Did you win?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the fire. "No one ever wins wars, little one. You just live through them." She thought about that for a while, then asked, "So why did you fight?" He looked at her, at the child who had saved him without knowing it. "Because sometimes the only way to protect what's left is to stand your ground, even if it costs you." Hannah leaned against him, small and warm. "Mama says you saved us." Jonah shook his head gently. "You and your mama saved me first." The fire crackled softly, the mountainside under the stars. For the first time in a lifetime, Jonah Hale felt the weight of the world lift, not because it had grown lighter, but because he had grown strong enough to carry it. He looked toward the horizon, where dawn would come again, and thought, maybe peace isn't the absence of ghosts, maybe it's learning to live beside them. The first snow of the new winter came quietly. It drifted down like ash, soft and endless, covering the cabin, the trees, the graves, the scars. Inside, Clara sat by the fire, her journal open on her knees. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed by years and smoke. She wrote slowly, her handwriting steady despite the tremor of age. "There was a time when I thought the mountain wanted to bury us. But now I see it was teaching us how to live. She paused, looking up at the window. Hannah was outside, laughing, throwing snow at Jonah as he tried, unsuccessfully, to look stern. The air was filled with their voices, their joy echoing off the trees. The day I came here, I carried my child in my arms, ready to bury her. I thought I had reached the end, but that day became our beginning. The fire crackled. The room smelled of pine and tea. Jonah stepped inside, shaking the snow from his coat. His movements were slower now, but his eyes, those quiet, steady eyes, still held the same warmth that had once frightened her with its strength. He sat beside her, glancing at the journal. Writing again. She smiled, just trying to remember the days before they fade. He looked toward the window, where Hannah danced through the falling snow. Some things never fade, he said softly. We built this life from ash and loss, Clara continued to write. And somehow, in the heart of the wild, we found peace. Not the kind that comes from safety, but the kind you earn after you've walked through fire and survived. The wind whispered against the walls, but it no longer sounded like mourning, it sounded like a song. Clara closed the journal, tying it shut with a leather cord. She set it on the shelf beside an old photograph. The three of them standing in front of the rebuilt cabin, the mountains behind them endless and bright. She turned to Jonah, resting her hand on his. When the time comes, she said gently, promise me you'll read it to her, all of it. He nodded, his voice low. I will. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in white silence. Hannah ran back to the porch, her cheeks flushed, holding something in her hands, a small sprig of wildflowers, stubbornly alive despite the frost. Look, she cried, they're growing again. Clara smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, they always do. Jonah looked out across the land. The mountain that had once been his prison, now his home. The place that had taken everything, had given him back more than he could have imagined. A family, a reason, and the quiet grace of redemption. As the firelight flickered and the storm sang beyond the door, the mountain seemed to breathe alive, eternal, and kind. And on the final page of Clara's journal, written in her steady hand, were the words that would outlive them all. Love, when true, can bring even the dead back to life. The camera would slowly pull back, the cabin glowing in the snow, smoke rising gently into the pale sky.